kingdom of heaven is like. It's what Jesus starts off all of these parables with that we are entering into with the kids this week. The kingdom of heaven is like. And I start this morning by putting before you another kind of parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a small group of kids at a small church hidden away in a small village next to the Blimpie. This small group of kids have no jobs. They have not much money to call their own. They have no transportation, but they were able to feed families of kids at Mary Free Bed Hospital for more than a month. That is how the kingdom of heaven works. The kingdom of heaven is a small group of kids at a small church hidden away next to the Blimpie in a small village who can feed families for an entire month. This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. Here's what Lauren Johnson, our children's ministry director, who you met a few minutes ago, here's what she had to say about this in our weekly email. A few short months ago, we began our mission to help families at Mary Free Bed Rehab Hospital with stocking their patient-parent pantry for the month of February. We invited our kids, ages pre-K through 4th grade, to practice a special kind of generosity, one that had our children thinking and caring for other children, ones they don't know and probably will never meet. How significant could our humble children's ministry be? Over the fall and into the winter, our kids reached out to congregation members, called their grandparents, and explained their mission to family and friends. And those giant empty boxes that you saw in the back began to fill with food. When I dropped off the food this week, I was told that our kids and their network of their loved ones collected more than a month of food and that it would last until spring. This is the kingdom of God at work, and it began with our littlest members. The kingdom of heaven is small, like a seed, like a pearl, like a grain of salt, like a treasure, yes, but it's a treasure that's buried in a field. It's the kingdom of heaven that shows up when an old woman living in poverty gives away the few cents that she has. The kingdom of heaven shows up when a tiny baby, born of a nobody couple in an out-of-the-way place, lives, dies, and rises again in the way of radical self-giving love. Corey, if you could put up a blank screen, that would be great. The kingdom of heaven is small. We ourselves are about to embark upon a new political season, a new kingdom, if you will, with the inauguration of a new president tomorrow. And we've already seen what this kingdom is like. It's a kingdom of domination, a kingdom of wealth, a kingdom willing to do violence for the sake of some supposed greater good of security or law or order. This kingdom is many more things. It's complex, of course, and not all of it is bad. I confess I have a hard time admitting that. This kingdom is bluster. This kingdom is showy. This kingdom is big. And the powers that be, both within us and outside of us, would have us to think that this is the kingdom of heaven, that the kingdom of heaven is bluster and showiness and bigness and powerful. But Jesus asks us to lay this agenda aside. And it is an agenda within our own hearts as well, and is an agenda that is all around us. We must lay this agenda aside because the kingdom of heaven is small. It's like a seed. It's like a pearl. It's like a grain of salt. It's like yeast. It's like a treasure, yes, but one that's buried in a field, like an old woman giving a few cents, like a tiny brown-skinned boy born in a manger. The kingdom of heaven is small. Jesus knew that these things would be difficult for us to understand and hard for us to accept. So most often, he told it slant. He didn't come at it straight on most of the time. He used word pictures and stories and comparisons to help us to grasp his teachings. And so he says things like this. Jesus put before them another parable. Matthew 13 is a whole string of parables where Jesus is trying to come at it from different angles to tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in a field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air can come and rest, make nests in its branches. Then he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. 3 measures of flour is somewhere between 50 and 60 pounds of flour. It's a lot of flour that Jesus is talking about here. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. So when we hear this story, we have images of trees and loaves of bread, many, many, many loaves of bread with 60 pounds of flour. But Jesus doesn't say that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard tree. Jesus doesn't say, at least not here, that the kingdom is like a loaf of bread. He doesn't say that the kingdom of heaven is the finished product. He says that the kingdom of heaven is the smallest beginning. The kingdom of heaven is the seed. The kingdom of heaven is the yeast. It is the invisible things that begin the hidden work under the soil and inside the dough. The kingdom of heaven does not grow from those things. The kingdom of heaven is those things. The kingdom of heaven is small. As Jesus' original hearers would have been living under an oppressive Roman government and having inherited the idea that the kingdom of heaven was going to come in with military might and overthrow the Romans to set up God's reign, the disciples are just as taken aback by this as we are. Because if I'm honest, I want the kingdom of heaven to be like a government that cares for the poor and the stranger. I want the kingdom of heaven to look like laws that solidify equal rights for people, regardless of their race, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, or their socioeconomic status. That is what I want the kingdom of heaven to look like. But my friends, those are outcomes. That's the tree, that's the loaf of bread. That is not what Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is. Jesus didn't say the kingdom of heaven would look like movements when they reach critical mass to enact laws. He said it would look like the seed, the yeast, the hidden beginnings of things. John Paul Lederach is a peace-building practitioner. I first came across him in my doctoral work a few years back. He's a peace-building practitioner out of the Mennonite tradition who has worked all over the world in places suffering from seemingly impossible conflicts. He has sat at tables with militia groups and gangs, with impoverished rural women and high-ranking officials, working all the angles to bring people together into sustainable peace that's characterized by justice. John Paul Lederach says that when we're looking for evidence of peace taking hold, which we might call the kingdom of heaven, when we're looking for evidence of the kingdom of heaven beginning to take hold, we tend to look for critical mass. Critical mass that might look like large-scale demonstrations or the tide beginning to turn or growing support for things like ceasefires. We tend to look for critical mass. But John Paul Lederach has learned to look for something else, and it is what he calls critical yeast. Critical yeast. What are the things, the movements, the relationships, the people that are hidden beneath the surface, behind closed doors, underground, so to speak, that are doing their work and doing these small things like a mustard seed, like a grain of yeast, that are necessary in order for the critical mass to grow. My friends, we are in a time of critical yeast. Critical yeast, John Paul Lederach says, is a certain quality of relationship that ultimately alters the functioning of the whole. Think about how yeast does its quiet work, changing the structures within the dough in order for there to be air within it. A certain quality of relationships restructures society in much the same kind of quiet way. Like a small amount of yeast distributed through 60 pounds of flour can make all of the dough rise. People of the critical yeast will have an amazing impact on the critical mass that we long to see. A certain quality of relationship. What do you think that might be? A certain quality of relationship is the critical yeast. I think if I were to sum up all of what Jesus teaches about how we are to live in relationship, it would be to love your enemy. Refuse to see anyone as an enemy. There's a certain quality of relationship that makes the critical yeast work toward the critical mass, but we might be in a critical yeast stage. A certain quality of relationship. Could it be the kind of relationships that we have here within our congregation? People from different backgrounds, different cares, different family structures, different concerns, but we seek to love one another. And 125 years almost of doing that in this place has had an impact, a positive impact on the community around us. It has helped us to show people what community looks like. It's a certain quality of relationship that starts maybe with yourself. Are you feeling discouraged today about the state of things because you see no evidence of the kingdom of heaven? Jesus' invitation is to look with different eyes and even then know that you might not see it. But that doesn't mean that the kingdom of heaven is not at work. Don't lose hope just because you don't see anything happening, because the kingdom of heaven is a child with no money. The kingdom of heaven is a grain, a crystal of salt, a smallest seed, a grain of yeast. The kingdom of heaven is the invisible beginnings. I sometimes feel powerless in all of these things that I long to see different in our society. I sometimes feel powerless. What can I possibly do? And I want to encourage us today to start with ourselves. It's the only thing you can really change, right, is yourself. So let's practice this mustard seed kingdom. Let's practice this critical yeast kingdom by having a certain quality of relationship with ourselves. Chuck DeGroat is a teacher at Western Seminary and a pastoral care scholar. He posted this this week that has stuck with me so much. He says, regulating your nervous system is a subversive act in a late-stage capitalist society whose very existence depends on individual and collective dysregulation. Regulating your nervous system is a subversive act in a late-stage capitalist society whose very existence depends on individual and collective dysregulation. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what that dysregulation means? It's like if you're on edge all the time, if you're scurrying around all the time, a million distractions, you're all over the place. That is how the late-stage capitalist society builds itself on harmful theories of power, is by all of us being dysregulated all the time. Because then, if we're dysregulated all the time, if we can sign on to the fact that we need something from outside to help us feel okay, we need substances, we need to shop, we need to have all security around us with our image or all of some kind of leader. That is how harmful societies develop and continue. So regulating your nervous system is a subversive act. Regulating your nervous system is where the collective yeast, the critical yeast begins, with regulating your nervous system. You might not be able to contribute to the rebuilding of Gaza, but you can regulate your nervous system, and that might be the critical yeast. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It takes discipline. You already know how to do it. It's what we do every Sunday when we start out here. So let's end by practicing collective yeast of regulating our nervous systems together. You can stay seated. And I like to have both my feet planted on the ground. That's a very grounding posture for me. And inhale for 4 and exhale for 8. Do it in your own mind. Practice it within your own self. And just notice what happens to your body as you breathe in for 4 and out for 8. God, we thank you for the gift of breath. That is how Genesis tells us that you gave life to humanity. It was with breath, your breath. When we can do nothing else, we can breathe. And the ancient wisdom and the modern science both know that it is in the stillness that we can be loved and love. It is much easier to love our enemies with a regulated nervous system when we return to our breath. When we can manage to not lash out, not feel threatened, that we can get curious about other people and learn to listen. Thank you for the small teachings, that we don't have to look to big, flashy, showy things, but that you work in the small and in the invisible, in something as insignificant as a breath. Help us to return to that truth as often as we need to, in returning to our breath, knowing that this is the collective yeast that builds the movement that we long for. In your name, amen.